And we're going to get going. All right. Hello, and welcome to session 6 of the Balanced Gymnast program. I am really excited to talk to you tonight about supporting your gymnast's relationship with food and body. And if you live in America, you probably have struggled with food and or your body in one way or another. And maybe it wasn't until your adult years, maybe it wasn't until postpartum, or maybe you started struggling, as a little kid. And I know so many of the parents and gymnasts that we work with, a big motivation for those parents is they want their gymnasts to have a healthy relationship with food and their body. They don't want their gymnasts to struggle like they have. And that is something that we hold near and dear. Of course, I care about your gymnast, progressing in the sport and reaching her goals, whatever those are. But I also know that gymnastics is temporary and we want to leave gymnasts better than we found them. And so that's something that we kind of weave into everything we teach. So tonight we're going to talk about, fighting against diet culture, what can go wrong and what can go right when it comes to nutrition and trying to get your gymnasts to eat healthier, what normal eating looks like, how to support body image, and then we'll do a little bit of a wrap up and kind of talk about what's next. So, what is normal eating, right? What does that even mean these days? And I won't disagree that the food landscape we live in here, at least in the United States, is absolutely bonkers, right? It's crazy. It's crazy. I think so much of what is available at the grocery stores and convenience stores like doesn't even resemble food, right? And so, as I've always said, there's nothing wrong with wanting to eat healthfully. There's nothing wrong with wanting to eat wholesome, nutrient dense foods. But I think at the same time, there's room for the fun foods, whatever that looks like for your gymnast. And something that we find with our gymnasts is when they are adequately fueled and when they have permission to eat all foods, they often don't necessarily want all foods, especially maybe things that were like previously forbidden. So I think it's really important for gymnasts to be able to eat all foods. That doesn't mean they're going to eat all foods at all times, but I don't want them to have any sort of guilt or shame about what they're eating or fear. I think it's important for them to be able to pay attention to hunger and fullness cues to the extent that we can. Sometimes this can be really challenging, especially when we're underfueled, when we're working back from that. And I think most importantly, it's for any athlete to be able to use food to perform their best, to recover their best, and to not let fear about food or their body or weight or shape get in the way of them doing what they need to do to push their physical limits and to stay healthy. And a really good example of that is I was talking with a client today who knows another client of mine from another gym, and obviously because of HIPAA, like I can't I can't say, "Oh yeah, I know them," right? I just kind of have to like, okay, like nod my head and listen, right? And they were talking about this gymnast who is like a level 10, class of 2027. Um, and I guess somehow they found out about them working with us, and that gymnast was like, "Oh yeah, Christina just tried to make me fat." And like, thankfully, this mom has a good head on her shoulders, and she was like, "No, no way, like that can't be what's going on." And I was like, "Correct." But that just goes to show a lot of our gymnasts do struggle with disordered eating and body image and have a very skewed view of what is appropriate for them. And what's interesting is I actually suspected that with that gymnast because I could just tell there was a lot of resistance. But that gymnast had been underfueled for a long time. She'd had a lot of injuries. Her body had caught up pretty well in terms of growth, but still a lot of pushback, a lot of resistance. So it was really interesting kind of hearing that from another parent of like a lower level gymnast and kind of all the pieces coming together. And frankly, it just breaks my heart because that client had never really expressed that to me. Um, and I don't blame her, but I definitely feel like that's something we could work through because that's what I thought, when I was a gymnast and I was massively underfueled and struggling with disordered eating. I saw a dietitian like 2 times that was at like an eating disorder outpatient clinic. And I was like, oh yeah, she's just trying to make me fat. She doesn't know anything about gymnastics, blah, blah, blah. And that was actually just like my own disordered eating. Like she actually didn't do anything wrong. I just was really scared, but I just wasn't in a place where I could really even admit that. So, anyhow, you know me, kind of from the start, we've talked about this all foods fit approach, right? Where objectively there are foods that are more nutritious, that have more vitamins, more minerals, more antioxidants, less sugar, healthier fat, so on and so forth. And then we obviously have what I call the fun foods, right? The sweets, the treats, all the things that, yeah, they don't objectively have as much, nutrition in terms of nutrients, but they still provide carbs, protein, and fat. And I do think there can be a place for them. Um, in the diet because food is not just fuel, it's social, it's cultural, it's emotional. And I find that often our families that are like the cleanest eaters, healthiest eaters often have the most dysfunction. Not always, but often in terms of basically the gymnast just wanting what they can't have or aren't allowed to have. And so, especially as they get older and they have a lot more autonomy, they don't know how to regulate the sweets and treats. And that right there is a bigger problem in terms of your gymnast long-term health and weight management and longevity versus kind of what I call the B plus nutrition, where most of it is healthy, but there's definitely some of it that maybe is more social cultural, right? So this is what we call gentle nutrition. This is what I'm talking about is this concept of, how do we bring together the nutrition knowledge and facts that we have about food plus our own kind of hedonic desires to eat things that taste good. And sometimes the things that taste good aren't really the most objectively nutritious things for us, right? So I think it can be a compromise of sorts. And obviously, I prefer to try to eat food that is as close to the ground, is minimally processed, so on and so forth, just because that tends to retain more of the nutrition and have more, whatever. But at the same time, I think there's room for the sweets and treats. So I think you can use kind of your outer nutrition wisdom, right, when you're making choices, but at the same time, understanding that, if your kid is massively underfueled, at some point we just have to get calories. And you guys know us, there's times where we have to recommend milkshakes and lots of chocolate milk and dessert after dinner. And it sounds totally crazy and counterintuitive. But when you have a kid who is years behind on growth, who is super broken, who is still training, 20, 25, 30 hours a week, like if their diet was to be 100% clean and healthy, they wouldn't be able to get the amount of calories and carbs and protein and fat that they need to actually heal. And so I know for a lot of you, it's been a mindset shift. And this is now, right? What your gymnast needs right now might be different than what they need in 6 months, will definitely be different if they quit the sport, will definitely be different compared to what they need as an adult. And so this isn't a one and done, right? Like just because you finish the program, we are here if you need ongoing support. We're here if things change, because it definitely is a journey. But I think it's important to look at nutrition and the averages. And I think this session couldn't come at a better time because it's January 2nd and we are inundated with the diet talk and the new year, new me. Everyone's getting back to their, typical diets after the holidays. And I think it's important to look at the averages, right? Did you indulge more over the holidays? Did you have more sugar and less vegetables and all that stuff? Probably. Is that going to significantly impact your health? No, not if you just kind of get back to your normal, right? So it's really important to look at those averages versus things in black or white absolutes. So how do we apply this concept? I mean, I think it's simple things like making swaps for more nutritious foods when you can and when it makes sense. So, if your child refuses to eat whole wheat bread and white bread is the only way that they will eat their sandwich at lunch, then I'm probably going to say, do what you need to do so that they eat their sandwich so that they have enough energy going into 4 hours of practice, right? Like that just kind of is what it is at this current stage. If you can, though, swap to a whole grain, swap to something less processed, and they will still eat it and enjoy it, then awesome, more power to you, right? I think another good example of this would be when we're eating out or doing takeout. A lot of families feel like eating out is a failure, right? They feel guilty about it. They feel like it's not as nutritious, but I think there can be a balance, right? So maybe some nights you order in pizza, Cool. That doesn't have to be a bad meal. You can pair it with a salad or you can pair it with fruits and veggies, right? Like it doesn't need to be all or nothing in that way. I think there's a lot of products on the market that could be kind of diety in nature, but also could be convenient for your gymnast. And I think a great example of this is like a protein fortified pancake mix. I know a lot of your gymnasts have tried the Kodiak cake, pancake mix, frozen waffles, whatever. Um, they add protein to it. So they're really trendy in that way. And some of your gymnasts love it. And it's a great way to get some protein in them at breakfast without having to add like yogurt, egg, something on the side. And I know some of your gymnasts have tried it and absolutely hated it. And so then as a parent, you feel kind of weird of like, oh, like they don't like this healthier thing. And again, in sessions, we have told you guys, hey, if your kid doesn't like the Kodiak cake waffles, that's fine. Please buy them the regular waffles that they actually will eat. Because at this point, given their current situation with growth, with injuries, with fueling, with gym, like we just have to get them fueled and that's okay. I think another example of gentle nutrition would be like timing, right? And so before a meet, I'd probably say, hey, let's do the grilled chicken sandwich at Chick-fil-A versus a bunch of fried food, just from a timing digestion standpoint. That is not making any sort of moral judgment about saying one is healthier than the other. It's very much just applying our nutrition knowledge to the knowledge of timing and digestion and setting your gymnast up for success. And I always explain that, if I'm talking with the gymnast, we're talking about pre-competition nutrition. I'm like, hey, we don't want to have a lot of fried foods before a comp because I don't want to make your tummy upset. There's nothing wrong with French fries or chicken nuggets. If you want to enjoy those after, that's great. But like, hey, for your meal right before the comp, let's pick something that we know like settles really well on your tummy. So how do we use this concept in sports? I think we assess, the sustainability of a lifestyle. We don't do diets around here. You won't see me talking about detoxing or Whole30 or clean and lean and green. Like you won't see me talking about that because we believe in gentle consistency. I think all of us probably have goals for the new year in terms of maybe getting back in the kitchen some more, relying less on fast food, working towards having more veggies at meals, right? Like I think those are all great goals. But whatever goal that you set, I want it to be sustainable. I'll never forget a couple years ago, I had a family inquire to work with us, and they'd worked with another, pretty well-known nutritionist in the space who, all she does is like clean eating. And the parents had mentioned that, and I was like, "Oh, like, how'd it go?" And she's like, "Well, her program worked great when we could do it, but we just couldn't stick with it." And you could just hear the guilt from this parent because she felt like she had let down her kids. And I was like, "Look, you've done nothing wrong. We have to do things that are sustainable. And if making everything from scratch and meal prepping for hours on Sunday for the whole family, if that's just not in the cards for you, then that's not going to be helpful for your family, right? Like, I'd rather you pick a few habits that we know we can stick to that can really move the needle for your gymnast. And that's what we focus our energy on. I think we really evaluate how we talk about food. I think the concept of food as fuel and not categorizing things as good or bad, just really being cautious about the way that we talk about food can be so, so helpful for our gymnast. And then I think assessing the risk, in every nutrition decision and intervention. And I think a good example of this is weighing gymnasts. You will find that more and more in our practice, we are asking you to buy something called the Clear Step scale. It's a numberless scale that will transmit a weight to us. And then there's an option for parents to see it as well. But that way, if we need to weigh your gymnast, they're not stepping on the scale and seeing the number. And I know a lot of parents are like, that's overkill. My kid doesn't care. They actually want to gain weight. And I'm like, look, it's fine until it's not. And the one moment that it's not fine and it triggers disordered eating, we can't get that back. And so when we have a gymnast that is underfueled, we know we need to monitor weight. We're going to take that extra precaution because it's just not worth it in the long run. And that scale on its own, it's about $75. And then the subscription to it is like $7 a month. And that just pays for your access to it, which I think is stupid, but it's just the way it is. Honestly, that pales into comparison to what it costs for eating disorder treatment. If your kid has an eating disorder, not only are they going to need a dietitian, they're also going to need a therapist. Therapists that are actually trained in eating disorders are typically $180 to $200 a session. And depending how bad it is, they might need 2 sessions a week for weeks and weeks and weeks. Obviously, dietitian could cost that much. Maybe insurance will cover it, maybe not. If it's really bad and your kid needs higher level care, I don't need to explain this to you, but all that to say, it is worth it to be careful in what we do and how we talk about food, how we talk about weight, because it's just not worth it. I think unfortunately there's still a lot of what we call diet culture that gets in the way of adequate fueling in the sport of gymnastics, right? I think there's still a lot of fear and misinformation about food, specifically about carbohydrates and electrolytes and fun foods. I think there's a lot of fear about body appearance, growth, and development. I think there's a lot of misinformation still about puberty and growth and changing bodies. And I think ultimately, a lot of the advice that coaches and parents give are certainly rooted in good intentions, but may not actually be contextual for what your gymnast needs and or could lead to some really wonky things with food. I think a good example of this is, when coaches talk about gymnasts needing to bring healthy snacks to practice. Well, you guys all know that there's a difference between healthy versus the right fuel at the right time. And, you could bring dried fruit to practice if you're trying to get something that has more nutrients in it. You also could do a sports drink or fruit snacks. But if you send your kid to practice with hummus and carrots, like that's just not the right fuel. So no matter how healthy that is or whatever, it's still not the right fuel. Um, Same thing with, I feel like, comp season. There's a lot of just misinformation about sugar and carbs, and I'll hear coaches say stuff like, lay off the sugar, or, the sugar is going to make you slow or sluggish. And it's like, no, actually, that's what gives your kid energy. I won't forget, a couple years ago, I was working with a kid with an eating disorder. She was at a big gym with a ton of level nines and tens. And one of the meets they always went to, they'd stay at the Doubletree. And, the Doubletree has those famous chocolate chip cookies. And the coach would announce to all the girls that they weren't allowed to have a cookie until after the meet was over. And I'm like, a 200-calorie chocolate chip cookie is not going to hurt a high level gymnast who probably hasn't eaten enough that day anyways. Yet we have this mindset that sugar is going to make them fat, or carbs are going to make them fat, or sugar is going to make them slow. And it's just all the old school stuff that coaches were taught themselves, especially if you have coaches that are Eastern European, like the Russian, Bulgarian. Obviously, that's a generalization, but a lot of those coaches, very, very diety restrictive nutrition practices. I've worked with a handful of elite rhythmic gymnasts, and they are on a different level. I have had those gymnasts be told that they shouldn't drink water at practice because that could stop their heart. And I'm just like, where are we getting this information, right? And so again, a lot of this stuff is just things that coaches were taught themselves or thought to be true for themselves, and just continue to pass on things that really aren't rooted in science. The reality and I'm sure this statistic is higher, over 40% of high school female athletes report some form of disordered eating. I would say in gymnasts, that statistic is a lot higher because it's an aesthetic sport. And I also think there's a lot of underreporting with these statistics, because when you're filling out a survey, answering questions as to whether or not you struggle with food in your body, most people are going to play it down. Why are gymnasts more at risk? Well, it's a sport of perfection. So this sport attracts a lot of perfectionists, which is also why we try to be so careful in talking about weight and numbers, because often it's just never good enough. And a lot of our gymnasts have some weird ideas about, they need to weigh a certain amount, they need to weigh 100 pounds or less. They don't want to weigh, I can't tell you what it is, but it's typically that perfectionistic mindset, that type A behavior. Gymnasts are also at risk because of chronic underfueling. And the way I see it is, chronic underfueling can lead to negative body comp changes down the road. And then it can set your gymnast up for some pretty massive, catch up growth. And that in and of itself can often trigger some disordered eating and body image issues, not because there was anything wrong with their body, but because it's just such a shock to them in terms of how their body has changed, so much at what time, because they weren't actually growing and developing properly years prior. And then obviously still inappropriate nutrition comments about weight, shape, stuff like that, still prevalent in the sport. It's important to know that disordered eating doesn't have a look. So you can't just look at your gymnast and decide whether or not they're struggling with food. I would say 9 times out of 10, people who are struggling, they look completely fine, right? So I know typically our view of like an eating disorder is the super emaciated person, right? That's like skin and bones, but that's actually like a very rare situation. So I use the word disordered eating because that's different than a clinical eating disorder, right? It's definitely a big spectrum in my mind. If your gymnast is counting and tracking everything they eat, that's not normal. If they refuse to fuel appropriately for a workout, that's not normal. If all of a sudden they won't eat at friends' houses or restaurants and they have to know every single ingredient that's in something, that's not normal. If they can't eat normally without working out, so if they really struggled over the holidays, that's weird. If they can't eat all the food groups, if all of a sudden your gymnast announces that they won't eat carbs anymore, they're not eating sugar, or they're not doing dairy, or just being overly rigid with the same, meals and snacks, which I don't think is a lot of your gymnast. We typically don't work with gymnasts who have disordered eating inside the program. We normally work with them in a separate way. But again, you don't always know. It's often a silent struggle that it usually gets pretty bad before a parent actually knows what's up. So, what are some of the warning signs that you need to keep an eye out for? I think any sort of significant weight change, although I will say in children and adolescents, it's often a lack of growth, right? And this is where pediatricians often don't get it right. They think that to struggle with an eating disorder or to struggle with underfueling, that you should be losing weight, which you might see in an adult. For children and adolescents, it's usually just the absence of appropriate growth and development. And that doesn't mean they have a disorder, eating disorder. We work with a ton of gymnasts who are just what I call unintentionally underfueled, where no one was trying to starve, no one was trying to do anything. There's no body image issues. It's just one of those like you don't know what you don't know. I would say that's like 99% of the gymnasts that we work with, but then definitely 1% is like, yeah, there is some intentional restriction going on. I think sudden changes in eating behaviors, sudden changes in exercise patterns, body image disturbance, constantly talking about their body in a negative way, comparing their body. A big one can be an abdominal complaint. So, we will see weird GI issues, bloating, constipation, reflux, tummy aches in just pure underfueling. Um, we will also see that in intentional restriction, but they both lead to malnutrition, which can absolutely affect the GI system. No period or menstrual irregularities definitely could be a sign that something's up. Um, Use of compensatory behavior, so the scary stuff like self-induced vomiting, laxative abuse, diuretic abuse, stuff like that. It's not something we see often, but I will say it happens. And social media is a really scary place. There is still a lot of how to eating disorder content. And so, yeah, if you're a parent, you should not let your kid on social media. I will say that our healthiest gymnasts who have the healthiest relationship with food and healthiest relationship with body image at 14, 15, 16 as level 10s are not on social media. They have Instagram for recruiting purposes and their parents post everything with them, but they are not routinely scrolling Instagram or TikTok. And it's no coincidence. I mean, the research is all there in terms of the incidence and the increase in disordered eating, body image issues, anxiety, depression. And so, yeah, it's a big struggle, that's for sure. I had a college gymnast reach out to me a few years ago on Instagram. Never met her before, didn't know who she was, sent me a message and she was like, "Hey, I'm so and so. I'm going to be a freshman at XYZ University, D1 University next year. And I'm addicted to diuretics and laxatives. Can you help me?" And my heart just broke because this gymnast, I think, was 18 at the time, so technically not a minor. But also, it's like I'm just some random dietitian on Instagram, right? Like, I mean, I can help you, but like, who's going to pay for it? Like, do your parents know? Like, is there someone that can support you? We ended up working together for a short time during her freshman year in college, and it didn't go well. She needed access to a therapist, but she wouldn't tell her parents that she was struggling. She wouldn't tell her coaches that she was struggling, and therapists are cash pay. So while I could bill insurance for her sessions and that could kind of fly under the radar, like I could never get her in with an eating disorder therapist. Turns out her coach had weighed her since she was like 9 years old, and the kids had to weigh themselves every day. And so I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense as to how we got here. But really scary, right? It's like, how did the parent miss this? Like, how did they not know that their 16-year-old was buying diuretics and laxatives? But it's also really easy to hide that stuff, right? You were all teenagers at one time. I'm sure we all did stuff that our parents didn't know about. But it's also sad of like, well, how did she even get that idea, right? And it had to be social media, movies, stuff like that. So definitely scary stuff that I hope none of you ever face, but definitely something to be mindful of. So enough with that. How can we support their body image? So I think number one is we have to question our own beliefs about the ideal gymnast body and our own personal struggle. And I think a lot of us are guilty of projecting that onto our gymnasts, especially if they have a body type that's different than ours, or they just have a different body type that we worry won't be as successful. It's interesting that so many gymnasts struggle with body image because self-esteem informs body image. And typically, people who have higher self-esteem have better body image. And people have high self-esteem when they have a lot of skills and abilities, which gymnasts obviously have. So, why do so many gymnasts struggle? Again, I think it goes back to just the type of sport, the aesthetic sport, the perfectionism, the comparison. And I think a lot of gymnasts also have zero skills in terms of regulating mood and emotion. And so they often try to control their body, their image, their food in an effort to feel in control because they don't actually have the mental tools to cope with the stress and the fear and the anxiety that can surround the sport. We see a lot of negative body image assumptions, right? Things like if I just looked like so and so, I would be better. I must look perfect at all times. The first thing that people notice is XYZ when they look at me. Something that one of my early therapists taught me was something called fat talk. And I remember sitting in her office, it was sophomore year of college. I was crying about, school, and I think I was about to get a B in psychology, and all I could sit there and say is just, "Oh, I'm so fat," all this stuff, and she's like, "You are not allowed to say that again." She handed me a piece of paper, and it had, like, 3 or 4 columns of words, and they were all emotions, and she said, "You are not allowed to say that you're fat anymore. What are you actually feeling?" And I remember looking at that sheet of paper with all the emotion words on it, and I was speechless. I didn't know what I felt. All I knew was that I was quote unquote fat, which I was not, but that was my way of actually expressing I'm anxious, I'm frustrated, I'm this, that, or the other. And I think the same can be true for our gymnasts for sure. The other thing you have to know about perfectionists is they're often never happy with their bodies. They can have the best body in the world and it's still not good enough. And so this is why body comments are not super helpful. I really encourage you to not comment on your gymnast's body positively or negatively because number one, you can't control how it lands. Uh, and so it's just not worth it. So I think keeping comments more performance based, right? Of, hey, man, you're really working hard, or hey, your coach told me, how much improvement you've made on your vault, or wow, thanks for being such a great teammate out there at the comp today. Those are all much better ways to affirm your gymnast versus, wow, you're looking skinny, or hey, look at those abs, or this, that, and the other. In terms of positive body image, I think something that can be more helpful and accessible for all of us is something called body neutrality. And so instead of sitting here and feeling like you have to reach this state of zen of like, I love everything about my body, I think we can hold space for two things, right? I think you can hold space of, I can love and appreciate my body and be grateful for what it does for me, and there's also things about it that aren't my favorite that I don't love, but it doesn't mean that I can't still like live and enjoy my life. And I think you modeling that as a parent is super important for your gymnast to see. If your gymnast constantly sees you dieting, obsessing about your body, saying how fat you are, talking about your diet, like that's what they're going to struggle with because it doesn't matter what you tell them, like that's what you're modeling. No one says you have to have it all together. Just because you become a parent doesn't mean that you have everything, you know, great with your own relationship with food and body. There are definitely things that you can keep internal that they don't need to hear. But I think you can model, the best that you can. There is no one gymnast body, which thankfully is a sport. We're getting better about this. But there's definitely still a lot of kind of myth and misinformation. I have very strong feelings about what is a parent's role and what's a coach's role and what's not their role in terms of nutrition. Obviously, as parents, your number one job is to make sure that your kid is eating enough, right? That's number one. Then eating the right things at the right time, sure, that's next. And that will come a lot more easy if they're actually eating enough in the first place, which I know a lot of you have seen. I think safety is your job. And if they can fuel it, they can do it. And if they choose not to eat enough, ultimately, you as a parent are putting your kid at risk. And that's a really hard truth to face because it's very hard to control another human, but you absolutely do control whether or not they go to practice. Like that is something that's within your control. They're a minor, they can't drive, probably, they're not paying for it. And so sometimes you have to be the mean mom, right? You have to set those boundaries to keep them safe, especially because your gymnast prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. It's not developed until they're 26. And so they really don't have a whole lot of foresight into the consequences that come from continuing to train when underfueled. I think you can keep in communication with the coaches. And I know a lot of you have already seen massive improvements in your gymnast, and the coaches have come to you unprompted of like, wow, I don't know what you're doing, but XYZ has improved so much. She's got a better attitude, her energy's better, so on and so forth. And that should make you feel really good. Some of you will never hear that from your coaches because you're just at that kind of gym, and that's okay. You do not need their affirmation. They might even say crazy stuff, but you know you're doing the right thing and your gymnast is on the right track. And, I had this combo earlier with a parent. Sometimes you don't have a lot of choices in terms of the gym that your kid's at, especially depending on their goals. And so I think trying to protect them as best as you can, getting psychological support, getting nutrition support. Like, I would never want you to keep your kid in an abusive environment. Like, that's not what I'm saying, but I think you know what I mean. Of sometimes the situation is maybe less ideal than it could be, but I think there's a lot you can do to help buffer that, um, and help your gymnast, understand what's right. Hopefully this is not a problem at your gym, but just so you know, what a coach's role is with weight and body is not a whole lot. I think it's their job to provide qualified evidence-based nutrition education, which could look like just saying nothing about it or bringing a professional in to do some team education. I'd rather them just not say anything than say the wrong thing. But I think coaches have a big opportunity to really make change. And something we're working on as a business this year is trying to create kind of a resource for coaches because they're on the front lines, right? Like they notice the injuries, they notice the kids struggling, they notice a lot that I think a lot of them lack awareness of how those struggles or injuries are related to nutrition. And so I know that's a big goal for us as a company, to help kind of provide some more support for them, not for them to play dietitian, but probably just to give them some more awareness so that they can connect parents to appropriate, resources as needed. What's not a coach's role is providing nutrition counseling, reviewing food records, weighing gymnasts, making comments about their weight or appearance. Not appropriate. I will say, if a coach came up to you and said, hey, I've noticed it looks like your gymnast is losing weight. I've noticed them looking really skinny. I've noticed them really struggling in the gym. That's not wrong. Like, that is not a safe sport violation. If they came up and said, your kid is so fat, XYZ, if they weren't this heavy, they wouldn't have gotten injured. Like, okay, that's what's not appropriate. And I think a lot of coaches are just afraid to say anything. But I'm like, no, if you're watching a kid before your eyes waste away, like there's a problem if it's that noticeable and you need to speak up to the parent for sure, because really that's a liability issue for that kid to even be in the gym. Social media, I love it. I obviously run a business on it. I mean, I actually hate it. I don't even have a personal Instagram, and I wouldn't be on Instagram if it weren't for this is how I have to run a virtual business. But I'm an adult, right? Your gymnasts are not. And again, I think social media is a breeding ground for comparison, for disordered eating, for mental health struggles. And I think you need to be real careful of what your kid is looking at. They can be pretty crafty, they can hide their search history. And so, really, just limiting exposure is one of the best things that you can do. All right. So, enough of the scary stuff. Let's kind of wrap up our time together. We talked about this the very first session, so probably 12 weeks ago. And I think every quarter is good to just do like a mental check-in, or better, a check-in with your dietitian, to see how your gymnast is doing. Because again, nutrition is not a one and done. Your gymnast is growing, is developing. They're in season, they're off season, they're healthy, they're injured, right? Like their situation is constantly changing, and thus their nutrition needs could also change as well. I think it's great to check in right now of how are we doing going into season? Are we healthy? Are we not? If we were injured to begin with, are we making progress with that? How's our endurance in terms of getting through routines? How's our mood, our emotion regulation? How's our relationship with food and body? Are there things that we can be working on? Are there things that have popped up? Are there things that we need more support with? Hopefully you guys know and love the performance plates at this point. And again, it's not meant to be perfect, but it's a great just kind of guide to helping build plates wherever, whenever. And I think especially as we approach season and we're traveling a lot more, this can bring a lot of consistency to your gymnast fueling. Hopefully we're crushing it with snacks, and instead of just grabbing some fruit snacks or grabbing some goldfish, we're making a balanced, 2, 3 items snack that provides carbohydrates, but also some protein and fat. And this is not just good for gymnasts, but this is just like good, healthy people, how to manage your blood sugar kind of information. We are back to a new semester, maybe a new school schedule. And I know a lot of us are still recovering from the holidays, but hopefully we can kind of get back on track in terms of just being intentional about planning for the week, of having kind of a loose meal plan where we plan out 4 to 5 dinners. We make sure we have groceries on hand. I don't care what that looks like. That might be homemade, that might be eating out, it might be a hodgepodge of all the above. I think sitting down with your gymnast and talking about, what are 2 or 3 different breakfast ideas for the week? What are 2 or 3 different lunch ideas? Getting your gymnast involved with the planning and the packing and the preparing. I think is all super important as not just a life skill, but to help share some of the mental load with you. I hope your gymnast is leveraging their performance nutrition in the gym and hopefully seeing the benefits from having some intra-workout carbohydrates. I want you guys to always be on the lookout for signs of underfueling. I want you to question every injury. If we're getting sick a ton this winter, if all of a sudden GI issues pop up, if we have some sort of bone related stress reaction, stress fracture, it's time to get back in with your dietitian for us to reassess their nutrition. Maybe nothing's changed with their nutrition, but they're training more, they're growing, and they just need more food. Or maybe we've fallen off the wagon a little bit in terms of meals and snacks, and we've just fallen back into that deficit. It only takes a deficit of like 300 calories a day to fall back into underfueling and to see negative changes hormonally and with the bones. So that's basically just missing a snack every day. So it's very easy for things to kind of slip away. And I think it's not just the day to day, but it's also the weekends. And I think being very mindful of the weekends, especially during meet season, when your schedule's crazy, when you've got other kids doing other activities, really making sure your gymnast is closing that recovery gap day in, day out is one of the best things that you can do to keep them healthy. I think regular check-ins with pediatrician, regular check-ins with us, having us plot your gymnast on the growth charts, 3, 4, 5 times a year is super important, if they're growing normally. Obviously, if we're working back from underfueling, we're going to need more check-ins than that, at least until we get them back on track. But it's not just about getting them back on track, it's keeping them on track. And any of the level 9, 10 elite parents we work with who have gymnasts who are actually healthy, they will tell you that it is a remarkable amount of food that their kid needs to stay healthy at 20, 25, 30 hours a week. And it's become pretty routine. It's become pretty automatic. Everyone's on the same page of this is just what we need if we're going to train this much. And it really truly is like the only way that those kids can stay healthy, and not just stay healthy, but crush it. We've talked about labs. We talked about in-depth mineral analysis. Again, this is all stuff that we do in one-on-one coaching. We might do this once or twice a year, but again, definitely something to check back in with us on. And that's about it. So the bottom line is don't be a stranger. You are invited to the Balanced Gymnast membership. This is our alumni monthly membership for program alumni. This will give you access to us for ongoing question support and accountability. You'll get our monthly meal planner still. You will get access to our monthly workshops, like the Fueling for Comp workshop that we just did, or one of our cooking classes or gymnast Q&As. Our January workshop is on nutrition and skin health, which has been a highly requested topic. So it's going to be a really good one. If you are currently working one-on-one with us, amazing. Let's keep at it. You're not done. We're not going away. If you are cash pay, we can do another session or another package of just one-on-one sessions. Like, you don't have to pay for the program anymore. It's just the one-on-one sessions. If you've got insurance coverage, a lot of you have unlimited insurance coverage, so we can just keep going. I know for some of you, maybe your deductible has reset for this year, but you're going to meet it one way or the other. So we're happy to build towards that for you. But the bottom line is we're not going anywhere. And I want you to continue to use us. At this time, once a client, always a client. Like, when you're finished with the program, we expect you to keep working with us until your gymnast is in a good place. And then we'll let you know how frequently we need to see you. And I love graduating clients. I love saying, hey, I think we're doing great. Let's check in 3 or 4 months. Let's check in before nationals. Let's check in before summer, right? Like, if I don't hear from you, I'm going to assume everything is going swimmingly well. I saw a post the other day that really bothered me, and I do not think it's someone who did the program, but this parent was like, my level 9 is always injured and she's not underfueled. And like, all of our parents on that post, they were like, she probably is underfueled. You need to contact Christina. And somewhere in the comments, the parent was like, oh yeah, we've done one of Christina's programs, which, first off, she didn't spell my name right. So I'm kind of like, well, did you really work with me if you don't know how to spell my first name? But secondly, like, based on the description, level 9, all the injuries, like, I know all of our clients. Like, we talk about all of our clients. And especially if we have a client who just can't stay healthy, we know who you are, right? Because we've been in the trenches working with you. And so it made me sad, because I'm like, if you truly did do the program with us, like, why have you not reached back out? Like, if your kid is struggling, um, we haven't given up on you, right? I mean, I'm not going to chase you down. Like, we have a lot of clients. And so I expect you to communicate with me. It's just like your coaches, right? Your coaches are in charge of, I don't know, 30, 40 plus optionals. They don't have time to like reach out to all of you every single day and give you the download. They definitely will reach out if there's something crazy going on, but I don't think there's anything wrong with you as a parent reaching out to them every now and again and just checking in and saying, hey, just want to check in. How's she doing? Anything I need to be aware of? Anything I need to do to support you? That makes it a lot easier for them versus them trying to like manage you, if that makes sense. So all that to say, please don't be a stranger. 3 months has been a very short time frame. I know a lot of your gymnasts have made amazing progress. I know some of your gymnasts have only kind of bought into the process more recently. I know some of your gymnasts statuses have changed and maybe all of a sudden they're injured, and that's okay. There's definitely things that we need to be working on in terms of nutrition, and we'll get through this. And so, yeah, all that to say, don't be a stranger. Our membership is in Facebook, so very similar to the group that you're in right now. And we actually have a feedback survey that we always do. And if you fill it out, you will automatically get a coupon code for 1 month free of the membership. I love your feedback. I read all of them. We've made a lot of changes to the program since we started it 2 years ago, kind of based on your feedback. So give it to me, good, bad, and the ugly. We're not perfect, and there's definitely things that can change and evolve. There are some things that my hands are tied with, and there are other things that we can definitely make changes. You guys don't know this, but we actually moved the parent community to like an actual membership site earlier this year instead of Facebook for a lot of reasons, and we ended up going back to Facebook before your cohort started, just because while the other platform provided a lot better of an experience and a lot more organized way and all the things that people wanted, it wasn't as great of a place for engagement. So that's just a good example of like feedback that we took into consideration, made some changes, and then made some more changes. So anyways, that is what I have for you. You've probably gotten emails from us about becoming an affiliate, so you all are welcome to become an affiliate of the Balanced Gymnast program. Anytime we promote for like a challenge or a workshop, like our low ticket paid workshops, like the one this weekend, our comp season clinic, which is $25, you can get a personal affiliate link for that, and you'll get 50% commission on anyone who registers with your link. And then if you refer anyone to the program and they successfully enroll, we have a pretty lucrative compensation structure just as a way to say thank you. And I know some of you already, before you even have finished the program, have referred other teammates to us, which I literally cannot tell you how much I appreciate. So check your email for info about affiliate stuff. We will send an email out shortly about the feedback survey. I will drop the link to the feedback survey in the Facebook group. And then I said I was going to do another giveaway tonight. So drop your name and email in the chat, and we will do a giveaway for a swag box. Session 5, y'all voted for a leotard, and someone won that. And I'm going to mail it out this week. And then tonight we'll do a swag box, which will be fun. So with that, questions. Any question, no questions off limits. Can be about anything that you've learned in the program, any outstanding struggles that you're having. You let me know. It's been an honor and a joy to work with all of you. Your cohort, which starts in October, is one of my favorite because you have had a couple months to really start digging into nutrition before we're in the throes of comp season. And let's be honest, gymnast parents are really late sometimes because you're juggling 80 million things. And so the funny thing is that typically our cohort that starts in January is usually our biggest. Which is awesome, except for I'm like, oh, like I really need to do 3 months ago. Like we really needed to be working on this stuff before we were in the throes of season. And I think it's just because people don't realize that some nutrition changes take a while. And some of you are absolutely experiencing that right now. And some things improve really quickly, or at least they improve partially. And so definitely the sooner you start, the better. Okay. Yeah, someone said, I heard my girls more recently using the language of heavy and light to describe how they're feeling at the gym. Yeah, I hate that. Honestly, that is such a male gymnast thing. Like, as I have worked with more elite level male gymnasts, I think it's because of how like weight bearing their events are, like P bars, rings, pommel horse. There's very much that mentality of like lighter is better. And they do all sorts of weird stuff of like not eating before training, not drinking, weighing themselves a lot. And, we often find that when gymnasts feel heavy, it's often because they are sore, they're overtrained, they didn't fuel well enough, they're not hydrated, or maybe they just haven't pooped, right? But yeah, I think it's okay to normalize that sometimes our bodies feel a little bit off, but we can fuel it and do it anyways. Yes, you guys will continue to have access to everything. So you've got ongoing access to everything inside the portal. So that's another change that we had made. We had it and then we didn't have it and then we gave it back. So yeah, you do not need to print everything out unless you want to. It will all be in there for the foreseeable future. Um, mm, mm, mm. Yes, I'm so glad. And it is an investment, right? And I feel like right now this economy feels really weird. Like this feels weirder than any year I've been in business. And so I get that parents are legit struggling, but I hope you guys have seen how valuable this is and what you've learned. It's useful for yourself, it's useful for your other kiddos. And it's something that's going to last beyond the sport. And so I feel like I'm beating a dead horse half the time talking about nutrition of like, look, I'm not telling you to invest in nutrition just to enroll in my program. I'm trying to get you to understand that like it doesn't matter if your kid goes to, LSU camp when they're 12 years old, if they're so underfueled that they're going to be too broken to even get recruited, right? And again, it's just the lack of awareness in this sport in regards to how important nutrition and adequate fueling is if your kid is going to make it down the road. So it really truly is an investment. Yes, you guys will get an invite to the membership. We'll send an email that has the link to our feedback survey, which will give you a free coupon for a free month of membership. I'll post the webpage that just has info on the membership as well. I'm so glad. Yes. Oh, Megan is fabulous. Megan, Ryan, Melissa. I am super blessed to have such a great team of dietitians. So I love that you guys love working with them. Here's a good one. Is there a good response to a coach telling the athlete goldfish aren't good for you, or comments along those lines when they're properly fueling, but something the coach feels like is unhealthy? Yeah. So I think as an athlete, like they can just smile and nod. I think you could always step in as a parent and say, hey, you know, I think there's a lot of ways you could take. I think you could be real bold and set a boundary of like, hey, I would appreciate if you didn't make comments about what my kid eats. What they eat is what they need and it's what works for their body. Um, you don't have to be that bold, but I think you could explain like, hey, I heard you said this the other day. Here's actually why we do this. We actually work with a sports dietitian. And when it comes to intra-workout fueling, he needs something that, or she needs something that is actually quick digesting. And so, maybe snacks that seem healthier, like celery and hummus or carrots and peanut butter, like those actually aren't the right fuel sources for, this kind of activity, especially swimming, right? Swimming is very much high intensity, very similar to gymnastics in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, I think you can kind of pick your battle there. I think depending on your relationship, you can try to provide some education. We definitely have some good podcasts on that you could send to them. Um, or you could just say nothing and have your kid do what they need to do, right? But I think also helping your kid to understand, like, here's why goldfish are okay. Like, here is the science behind it. I think can also kind of arm them versus them just being like, well, I don't know why I eat goldfish, right? Like, I think being able to back yourself up is important because everyone has an opinion about nutrition, what you should be eating. And while I don't think you need to justify yourself, um, I also think a coach would be blown away if a teenager was like, well, actually, I bring things like goldfish because, this is something I learned from my sports dietitian that can digest fast enough to give me the energy I need. So, and I promise you, they like probably don't know those things. I didn't. It took me a long time to kind of wrap my head around that for sure. All right. Other thoughts, questions, things that y'all need from me. We'll leave the Facebook group open for like a week or so, any lingering things, and then you guys can transition to the membership group. Um, if anything pops up, don't be a stranger. If we don't hear from you, I'm going to assume it's going swimmingly well. If you did not add on the one-on-one sessions, please do so. Please reach out. Let's support you. And with that, I wish you guys the best this comp season. I know Ryan might be at maybe Eastern. So if you have a level 9, definitely say hi. I try to go to nationals every year, which will be in Utah this year. I'm judging at Pikes Peak in a couple weeks. So if you're there, say hi. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much it. It's definitely fun to see you guys in real life, that's for sure. Yes. Oh, I think that's so important. I'm so glad that we made the effort to attend the live sessions because we're bad at listening to replays. Join the club. I This is why we teach the program live because I think we're all so busy and have so many things fighting for our attention that at least for me trying to do something live, I have a lot better chance of actually attending it and listening than it just kind of collecting dust with all the other things that I like want to listen to. So, yes. Oh, Lindsay, definitely tell me in the Facebook group where you'll be. I'll be judging, so I don't know how well I can say hi. I have no idea what I'm judging yet. I think I'm judging Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'll be there Thursday night to see some clients at the elite session. But yeah, they haven't posted the assignments yet. So um, let me know what time it is, and maybe between sessions I can sneak off and say hi. So anyways, well, with that, you guys enjoy your evening. I'm gonna go cook some dinner and I'll see you in the Facebook group. I'll hopefully see you in the membership group and we'll go from there. Bye for now.